Welcome back to the deep dive. We've really gathered quite a library for today's session. We've got research, articles, detailed conversations with some real leaders in longevity and orthopedics people like
hmm
Dr. Vonda Wright, Dr. Florence Comedy, and we're looking at the science from Rhonda Patrick and Kieran Krishnan too.
hmm
Our mission today is, I think, pretty direct and actually quite personal for many listening. We're aiming to sort of dismantle this idea of inevitable decline as we age.
Right.
We want to equip you, the listener, with the critical insights, the tools maybe to maintain not just physical but cognitive vitality too. Really pushing back against that narrative that getting older automatically means getting frail.
What's fascinating is how all these different sources from, orthopedic surgery right through to functional medicine, they all converge on this one core idea,
Yeah.
challenging complacency.
Complacency about aging itself.
Exactly, particularly Dr. Vonda Wright. She argues very powerfully that our bodies don't just fall apart because we have another birthday. It's more about accumulated neglect over time.
So the decline isn't biologically fated, it's more of a lifestyle outcome.
Precisely. Which means it's not inevitable, it's potentially a choice. And that requires a pretty radical shift in thinking, starting right now, really, whatever your age. And the first step, according to Dr. Wright, has to be what she calls mindset mobilization.
Okay, let's dig into that first then. Mindset. Dr. Vonda Wright really positions this as the absolute foundation, doesn't she?
She does.
She talks about this deeply ingrained belief, almost socially accepted, that acts like a terrible self-fulfilling prophecy.
You mean the idea that aches and pains are just part of getting old?
Yes, exactly that. The moment someone feels a limitation, a sore knee, maybe they can't quite reach something, the immediate thought is often, oh, well, I'm just getting older, and they accept it.
And that acceptance is the crucial, damaging step. Dr. Vonda Wright describes it as a kind of stepwise, voluntary decline. It's insidious.
How does that look in practice?
Well, people start shedding activities, one by one. Maybe they stop running first because their knees hurt a bit. Then perhaps dancing feels too strenuous. Then stairs become a bit of a chore they avoid. Eventually, maybe they don't feel stable enough to, say, pick up their grandchildren safely. And Dr. Wright says, by the time they truly look at themselves, they often don't recognize the capable person they used to be.
And the sources suggest there are two main drivers behind letting this happen. First, that belief we mentioned that decline is just inevitable. But the second one, I found this really quite striking. It's the feeling that maybe they aren't worth the effort it takes to fight back.
That's a really critical point, and Dr. Vonda Wright highlights this, especially concerning women. She's observed that this self-neglect often stems from where their energy is directed.
You mean externally?
Yes, their emotional and physical reserves are poured into caring for others, children, partners, maybe aging parents, and there's just nothing left in the tank. Or perhaps they feel it's selfish to redirect that energy inwards towards their own future health.
So the antidote, this mindset mobilization, it starts with ditching what Dr. Wright calls the worship of youth.
Yes, and actively, consciously rejecting that cultural script that says aging must mean weakness and frailty. It's an intentional rebellion against that narrative.
But it's not just an internal pep talk, is it? The people around you play a huge role.
Oh, enormous. Absolutely. The sources point to that well-known idea, that we tend to become the average of the 5 people we spend the most time with.
Right.
So if your inner circle is constantly complaining about their aches, reinforcing that getting old is a miserable story, or maybe even subtly undermining your efforts, why bother going to the gym at your age? That social inertia is incredibly powerful and hard to fight against.
So part of the mindset shift might actually involve curating your social environment a bit more consciously.
It often does. You need cheerleaders, or at least neutral parties, not naysayers, if you're trying to build this new identity focused on proactive health.
That idea of identity change links quite neatly to some of the work by James Swanwick, particularly around habits like drinking.
Yes, he talks about how hard it is to change when your identity is really wrapped up in the habit. I'm Jim, the guy who loves his beer, or I'm Sally, the great hostess who always has wine flowing. Letting go of that feels like losing a part of yourself.
So what's his approach to overcoming that resistance?
It's quite clever, really. He suggests shifting the focus entirely. Instead of dwelling on what you're giving up the perceived pain of quitting, you focus intensely on what you're moving towards.
The positive outcome.
Exactly. So if it's alcohol, you're not thinking about not drinking. You're focusing on gaining vibrant energy, amazing sleep, mental clarity. That positive aspirational identity becomes the goal. pulling you forward.
That makes sense. And he simplifies the action part too, doesn't he, with those 4 decisions?
Yes, that's really helpful for avoiding overwhelm. Just 4 things. Stop something, start something, do less of something, do more of something.
Like, stop eating processed snacks, start a 10-minute walk, do less doom scrolling, do more reading. Simple, actionable steps.
It makes it feel achievable. But perhaps the most valuable part of his framework is how he addresses setbacks. Because, let's face it, everyone falters.
Right, the all-or-nothing trap. You miss one workout and the whole plan collapses.
That's precisely. Swanwick encourages adopting the mindset that actually the master expects the plateau, expects the occasional slip-up. It's part of the process.
Yes.
So you acknowledge it happened, maybe you even anticipated it. But the key instruction is immediate. Go again.
Just go again, straight away.
Instantly. No beating yourself up, no spiraling into, I've failed. You just recognize the lapse and immediately get back on track with the very next decision or action.
How does he frame that persistence? It sounds almost too simple.
He uses a great analogy, compound interest. Think about investing in the stock market. Your portfolio value doesn't go up in a perfect straight line, does it?
No, definitely not. There are dips, flat periods.
Exactly. But if you stay invested, the long-term trend is upwards. Health progress is the same. You'll have dips, you'll have plateaus. But if you have the discipline to go again, immediately after every single dip, the overall trajectory over months and years is powerfully upward. You stop a temporary lapse turning into a total derailment, which is where most people give up.
Okay, so that mindset, that resilience, sets the stage for taking physical action. And when we talk about physical action, Dr. von der Wright really puts a spotlight on something most of us probably ignore until it's too late: our bones.
We tend to think of them as just
Yes.
scaffolding, right? Silent and inert structures.
Until one breaks, which Dr. Wright from her orthopedic trauma work knows is incredibly painful and debilitating. But she stresses bones are far more dynamic than we realize.
Oh, much more. They're not just for structure or helping us move. This is a really crucial insight from her research. Bone is a major endocrine organ. It's a communicator.
An endocrine organ, like the thyroid or pancreas.
In a way, yes, it releases hormones. Specifically, she highlights one called osteocalcin. This hormone doesn't just stay local, it travels.
Travels where?
It travels through the bloodstream directly to the brain. And there, it triggers the release of BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor.
BDNF, right? Often called miracle grow for the brain.
Precisely. It's vital for building better neurons, for memory, for learning, for neuroplasticity. So get this. The health of your bones, which is directly influenced by the force and impact you put through them, literally helps build a better, sharper brain via this osteocalcin BDNF pathway.
Wow. So loading your skeleton actually boosts your brain function. That's quite profound.
It's a stunning example of how interconnected our systems are. It makes evolutionary sense, too, that the system for moving through the world is linked to the system for perceiving and navigating it.
And Dr. Wright also reminds us about the bone's role as a mineral reservoir: calcium, phosphorus, collagen.
Yes, it's the body's bank for these essential minerals. And if the body faces a severe shortage, perhaps through poor diet or a sudden hormonal shift, it will make a withdrawal. It will resorb those minerals from the bone to keep vital functions going.
Which highlights the importance of that constant balance between breaking down old bone and building new bone.
Absolutely. And that balance is significantly impacted by how men and women age differently, hormonally speaking. Dr. von der Wright points out that men tend to experience a fairly gradual decline in testosterone over many decades.
Slow and steady, relatively speaking.
Right. But for women, it's a completely different story. Around perimenopause, which for Dr. Wright herself kicked in around 47, but it varies. Women experience a sharp, quite traumatic drop in estrogen.
And that sudden hormonal cliff edge has major consequences, not just for bones.
Correct. For cardiovascular health, for instance. Women become more prone to microvascular heart disease problems in the smaller blood vessels, which is often harder to detect than the large vessel blockages more typical in men after menopause.
Okay. And for bones specifically.
The rate of bone loss accelerates dramatically. Before perimenopause, women might lose bone density at roughly 1% per year. During and after, that rate can jump to 2%, even 3% per year.
That's a huge acceleration. You could lose a significant chunk of bone density in just a few years.
You absolutely can. And that's precisely why Dr. von der Wright is so emphatic about defining the critical decade. She pinpoints ages 35 to 45, for both men and women actually, as the crucial window.
The time to really get your house in order, health-wise.
Exactly. This is when you need to be proactively building your bone bank account, getting your metabolic health optimized, getting hormone levels checked, because once those biological shifts really kick in and accelerate the decline, any action you take later is essentially playing catch-up from a deficit.
And often a deficit that's hard, maybe impossible to fully reverse.
That's the concern. But the challenge, as you touched on earlier, is motivating someone in their late 30s or early 40s to worry about a potential hip fracture decades down the line. There's this huge time gap.
So how does Dr. Wright bridge that gap? How does she make the risk feel real now?
She uses compelling stories, often from her own practice. She talks about a 24-year-old PhD student, academically brilliant, seemed healthy, but was what she termed skinny fat.
Meaning low muscle mass despite a normal weight?
Yes, and this student was already diagnosed with osteopenia. That's the stage before full-blown osteoporosis, at 24.
Wow.
And Dr. Wright uses this to hammer home a critical message. Osteoporosis isn't really a disease of old age. It's a disease of young women that just doesn't manifest until they're old. The damage, the weakening, happens silently in your 20s, 30s, and 40s.
That completely reframes it. The problem starts decades before the crisis hits. And for women, you mentioned the hormonal shifts, but the childbearing years add another layer of complexity, too.
Indeed. Pregnancy and breastfeeding are incredibly demanding metabolically. To provide calcium for the developing baby, the mother's body will temporarily draw down on her own bone reserves.
Like dipping into the savings account.
Precisely. And breastfeeding, in particular, can lead to a noticeable loss, potentially 3% to 5% of bone density per year of breastfeeding.
That's substantial.
It is. Now, usually the body replenishes this after weaning, but the potential issue arises if women have children closer together, especially if they start later in life. They might not have enough time to fully rebuild their bone density between pregnancies.
So you could end up entering perimenopause with an already depleted bone bank, and then the accelerated loss kicks in.
That's the double whammy scenario, yes.
Yep.
Which makes getting objective data even more critical. This is where Dr. von der Wright strongly advocates for DKISA scans.
The bone density scan.
Yes. She urges women, particularly those with risk factors like having breastfed multiple children, like your own wife perhaps, or a family history, or being petite to get a baseline scan. Knowing your actual T-score makes the risk tangible.
It moves it from an abstract fear to a concrete number you can track.
Exactly. And she addresses the cost issue head on. In the U.S., a DEXA scan might be around $99. People balk at spending that now. But compare that, she says, to the astronomical cost of dealing with a hip fracture down the line. The surgery, the rehab, the potential loss of independence, the ongoing pair costs. It can run into hundreds of thousands.
That $99 investment suddenly looks incredibly prudent when framed against the potential future cost, both financial and personal.
It's about overcoming that temporal disconnect. If a woman gets a scan at 45 and sees her T-score is already in the osteopenia range, that abstract risk of a fall at 75 becomes an immediate score she needs to improve now. It transforms anxiety into actionable motivation.
And this action, this bone building, ideally needs to start much earlier. You mentioned peak density.
Yes, peak bone mass is typically reached surprisingly young, somewhere between 25 and 30. After that, it's largely about maintenance and slowing the inevitable decline.
So for parents listening, the real focus should be on their children now.
Absolutely. If you have kids, especially daughters, the time to build that strong skeletal foundation is during childhood and adolescence.
That certainly hits home for me with my 12-year-old daughter, making sure she's getting the right kind of stimulus.
And Dr. von der Wright is very clear about what kind of stimulus that is. It's not gentle exercise like swimming or cycling. Those are great for cardiovascular health, but they do very little for bone density.
Because there's no impact.
Precisely. You need impact. You need sheer mechanical force going through the bones. So she encourages things like jumping, running, skipping, hopping activities that load the skeleton vertically.
The kind of stuff kids do naturally when they play, but adults often stop doing.
Exactly. That force stimulates the bone cells, particularly the osteoblasts, telling them to build stronger, denser bone. When we give up those fun, high-impact activities as adults, we stop sending that crucial signal, and the bone density starts to decline more rapidly.
Okay, let's pivot slightly now. We've talked mindset, we've talked bone structure. Now let's look at another major driver of age-related issues, something often hidden: chronic inflammation, or inflammaging, as it's sometimes called.
Right, and Dr. Mark Hyman and Dr. George Papanicolaou really challenged the traditional view of osteoarthritis here.
Yeah.
The most common joint problem affects almost everyone eventually.
The conventional wisdom was always that it's just wear and tear, right? Like parts in a machine grinding down over time.
Yeah, it was the mechanical model, yes. But they argue, quite forcefully, that osteoarthritis is fundamentally a chronic inflammatory disease. It's driven by low-grade systemic inflammation.
And that distinction completely changes how you'd approach treating it.
Absolutely. If it's primarily inflammation, not just mechanical wear, then things like joint replacement surgery might be addressing a symptom, but not necessarily the underlying systemic cause that might be affecting other joints or other systems too.
This fits perfectly with Dr. Mark Hyman's functional medicine approach, his take out the tax rule.
Explain that one.
Well, the analogy is if you step on a tack, you wouldn't just take painkillers and keep walking on it, right? You'd take the tack out. So applied to chronic disease, you need to find and remove the driver of the problem, the tack, rather than just suppressing the symptom.
So in the case of joint inflammation, the tack could be things like a poor diet, maybe leaky gut syndrome, poor microbiome health, chronic stress, or even environmental toxin exposures.
Exactly. You have to identify what's fanning the flames of that systemic inflammation. And Kiran Krishnan actually explains the cellular mechanism behind how inflammation damages the joint.
How does that work at the cell level?
He talks about inflammatory cytokines, specific signaling molecules like IL-6, TNF-alpha, IL-1 beta. These don't just cause irritation or swelling in the joint. They actually send a signal to the cartilage cells, the chondrocytes.
And what does that signal do?
It forces them to switch their function. Normally, chondrocytes are anabolic. They build and maintain the cartilage matrix. But under the influence of these inflammatory signals, they become catabolic. They start actively degrading the cartilage, so the joint's own cells turn against it, driven by inflammation.
Essentially, yes. The joint becomes a self-constructing environment, and the prevalence of this is just staggering. Kiran Krishnan refers to joints as the canary in the coal mine for our overall systemic health.
Why the canary?
Because the breakdown seems to start so early and is so widespread. He cites studies showing that something like 90% of people over 50 already have detectable arthritic changes in at least one joint.
90%, that's almost everyone.
And even more worryingly, he mentions that the majority of people over the age of 14 already show some early signs of the arthritic process beginning. It suggests this low-grade breakdown is happening silently for decades before people typically feel significant pain.
Which leads to a really dangerous situation when pain does eventually start, and people reach for painkillers.
Yes, that's a huge problem. Modern painkillers, NSAIDs like ibuprofen, or even opioids, they mask the pain signal. But pain is critical feedback telling you something is wrong.
So if you mask the pain, you just carry on loading and stressing that already inflamed, degenerating joint.
Precisely. You're essentially overriding the body's warning system, which allows the underlying inflammatory damage to progress much faster. You're accelerating the degeneration without realizing it.
Kiran Krishnan shared some really compelling results from a clinical trial looking at this, didn't he? Using a specific natural anti-inflammatory blend.
Yes, a blend of celery seed extract and boswellia. The goal wasn't just pain relief, but reducing the underlying systemic inflammation to see if function improved. They used the 6-minute walk test as a measure.
What did they find?
It was quite stark. The placebo group, even though many were also taking their regular prescription pain meds, showed basically no improvement in how far they could walk in 6 minutes after 90 days. Their pain might have been slightly masked, but their actual physical function didn't change.
Yeah, okay, and the treatment group?
The group taking the celery seed and boswellia blend increased their walking distance by almost 60%, a massive improvement in functional capacity.
Wow, 60%. And was that linked to inflammation markers?
Directly. There are systemic inflammatory markers, things like C-reactive protein, CRP, and IL-6, dropped dramatically by as much as 75% in some cases.
So that really drives home the point.
Yeah.
Tackle the inflammation, and you improve function, not just mask pain. It's treating the root cause.
Exactly. It shows it's not just a mechanical issue, it's deeply metabolic and inflammatory. And that connects to the mitochondria, too.
The energy factories in our cells.
Yes. Kiran Krishnan points out that the repair mechanisms within joints are packed with mitochondria. They need a huge amount of energy to rebuild tissue. So if your joints are chronically inflamed and breaking down, it might also be a sign that your overall mitochondrial health, system-wide, is compromised. It's another systemic link.
So if inflammation is the driver and often fueled by lifestyle, particularly diet, what are the main culprits Dr. Mark Hyman flags?
He consistently points to a few key dietary triggers. Gluten, for many people, highly refined vegetable oils like canola or soybean oil, excessive sugar, and artificial trans fats. These are the pro-inflammatory attacks that need removing.
And the flip side, what should we be eating more of?
It's the usual suspects, really, but consistently applied. Real, whole foods. Lots of colorful plants packed with phytochemicals, those compounds that fight oxidative stress. Good quality fats, like extra virgin olive oil, avocados, nuts, and seeds. And crucially, omega-3 fatty acids.
From sources like fish.
Yes, particularly fatty fish like sardines, mackerel, anchovies, wild salmon, yes, and mash fish, as they're sometimes called. These provide the EPA and DHA that are powerfully anti-inflammatory.
To really illustrate the inflammatory power of certain foods, Kiran Krishnan uses a pretty shocking comparison, doesn't he? French fries versus a cigarette.
He does, and it really makes you think. He poses the question, if you had to choose the lesser of two evils, eating a plate of French fries cooked in old, repeatedly heated, oxidized canola oil, or smoking one single organic tobacco cigarette, which would cause more systemic damage.
Most people would instinctively say the cigarette is worse, surely.
That's the common assumption. But Kieran argues he would choose the cigarette. His reasoning is based on the type and duration of the inflammatory response.
How so?
The cigarette smoke causes an acute, fairly localized inflammatory reaction, primarily in the lungs. It's certainly harmful, no question. But the French fries cook in that damaged oxidized oil. They trigger a massive global inflammatory cascade throughout the entire body,
Glow meaning.
affecting your blood vessels, your brain, your muscles, your joints, everywhere. And, crucially, this inflammatory storm doesn't just last for an hour or two. It can persist for 48 hours, even up to 5 days, from that single exposure to badly cooked fats.
5 days of systemic inflammation from one plate of fries. That's terrifying.
It certainly highlights the profound and long-lasting damage that poor quality fats and cooking methods can inflict, far beyond just the calorie count. It's about the biological signaling.
Okay, so we've covered mindset, bones, and inflammation. Let's move on to optimizing movement itself. Dr. Rhonda Patrick, she's shared quite a bit about her own shift in focus with training, hasn't she?
Yes, she has. She mentioned moving away from putting all her emphasis on endurance training, like Zone 2 cardio, which she still values, of course. But she realized, particularly for long-term health and mitigating frailty risk, that prioritizing the building and maintaining of lean muscle mass was becoming even more critical as she got older.
Muscle as the organ of longevity, as some call it.
Exactly. And if you're going to prioritize muscle, that immediately brings nutrition into focus, specifically protein intake. The sources we looked at established what we could call a new protein floor.
Meaning the minimum amount needed.
Yes. The old RDA, the recommended daily allowance, of about 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. It's now widely seen as just insufficient for actively maintaining, let alone building muscle, especially as we age or if we're active.
So what's the new recommendation, the new floor?
The consensus seems to be shifting towards a minimum floor of 1.2 grams per kilogram per day. But ideally, for optimal muscle protein synthesis and insurance against falling short on some days, the target range is actually higher, 1.6 up to maybe 2.2 grams per kilogram per day.
1.6 to 2.2, that sounds really quite high compared to what many people probably consume or what older advice suggested. Weren't there concerns about high protein intake and kidney health?
That's a common historical concern, but for people with healthy kidney function, the extensive research, especially in athletic populations, hasn't really borne out those fears at these kinds of intake levels. The rationale for the higher end, the 1.6 to 2.2 range, is partly insurance, ensuring you're never amino acid restricted, even on days your intake might dip slightly. It keeps the muscle-building machinery switched on.
And are there groups who need even more?
Well, needs certainly go up during growth spurts, so adolescents should probably aim for that 1.2 to 1.6 gigaLevergram range. And pregnant women also have increased requirements to support both their own tissues and the baby's growth.
Okay, so adequate protein is foundational for muscle. How does Dr. von der Wright frame the actual movement needed across the lifespan? She uses an acronym, doesn't she?
Yes, the FACE-E acronym. It stands for flexibility, mobility, aerobic activity, carrying a load, and equilibrium or fast speeds. It's a nice, comprehensive way to think about hitting all the bases.
And she emphasizes that movement isn't just about, burning calories or even building muscle directly. It's doing something deeper at the cellular level.
Absolutely. It's about signaling. She explains that physical activity acts as a potent signal throughout the body. Citing studies, often in animal models initially, she highlights how movement can rejuvenate stem cell function, improve mitochondrial health and number, positively modulate gene expression, and act as a powerful anti-inflammatory by helping regulate blood sugar and glucose metabolism.
So exercise is literally communicating health instructions to our cells.
That's a great way to put it. It tells the body, we're active, we're capable, maintain the systems.
For the aerobic component of FACE, she confirms that most of that effort, maybe 80%, should be in that zone 2 range.
Yes, moderate intensity. Brisk walking where you can talk but maybe not sing comfortably is a good example. This builds aerobic base, burns fat efficiently, and importantly, keeps stress hormones like cortisol relatively low, aiding recovery.
But zone 2 alone isn't enough for optimal signaling, particularly for muscle and bone.
Correct. You need higher intensity stimuli as well. This is where the fast speeds part of FACE comes in, primarily through sprinting or high-intensity interval training, HIIT.
How often and how intense?
Dr. Wright suggests maybe twice a week, and it doesn't have to be long sessions. Very short bursts of maximal effort, say 30 seconds followed by complete recovery, maybe 2 or 3 minutes before going again. Repeat that a few times.
Why is that short, intense burst so important?
Because it triggers different signaling pathways than steady-state cardio. It's particularly potent for stimulating muscle stem cells, which help repair and build muscle tissue, and for driving mitochondrial biogenesis, the creation of new mitochondria. It provides a powerful metabolic jolt that walking alone doesn't achieve.
Okay, so we have flexibility, mobility, zone 2 aerobic, and high-intensity sprints. What about the carrying a load part?
That's the strength training piece.
Yeah.
And Dr. von der Wright is very clear here. Especially in midlife and beyond, the primary goal of resistance training should be building and maintaining strength and power, not necessarily muscular endurance.
So lifting heavy.
Yes. She advocates for lifting genuinely heavy weights, focusing on lower repetition ranges, maybe around 4 reps per set, taking close to or reaching muscular failure for perhaps 4 sets. The aim is to build the raw strength capacity needed to perform daily tasks, resist falls, and maintain independence for longer.
The visual evidence she uses to support this kind of lifelong activity is incredibly powerful, the MRI scans of thighs.
Oh, it's unforgettable. She describes comparing MRI cross-sections. You see a 40-year-old triathlete's thigh muscle. It looks like a perfect lean flank steak. Dense, uniform, beautiful muscle architecture.
Okay, the ideal.
Then you see the thigh of a sedentary person of a similar age. She describes it vividly as looking like Wagyu beef.
Wagyu beef, meaning marbled with fat.
Grossly marbled. The muscle structure is infiltrated and replaced by fat. You can literally see the loss of functional tissue. It's a visual representation of sarcopenia, age-related muscle loss.
That's a disturbing image, but what's the punchline?
The punchline is the MRI of the 70-year-old triathlete. And the incredible finding is that it looks virtually indistinguishable from the 40-year-old triathlete's scan.
70 looking like 40 internally.
In terms of muscle architecture maintained through consistent, demanding activity, yes. It's profound proof that what we typically call normal aging, the muscle loss, the fat infiltration, isn't an inevitable biological process. It's largely the result of decades of disuse and neglect. Intentional activity preserves the structure.
So essentially, we don't just age, we accumulate neglect, and that's what shows up on the scan. That's both daunting and incredibly hopeful.
It puts the power back in our hands, doesn't it?
It really does. Now, thinking about supporting this kind of activity, particularly muscle performance and recovery, Rhonda Patrick is a strong proponent of creatine supplementation.
Yes, she often highlights it as one of the most extensively studied, safest, and most effective supplements for enhancing muscle strength, power output, and performance, especially in conjunction with resistance training.
Its benefits for muscle seem well established, but she also talks about cognitive benefits needing a different dosage.
That's a really interesting refinement. While the standard 3 to 5 grams per day is generally effective for muscle saturation, she explains that our muscles are metabolically greedy. They tend to soak up that initial dose primarily for physical energy production, ATP regeneration during exercise.
So not much gets left over for the brain at that dose.
Potentially not enough to make a significant difference, especially if you're training hard. So if the goal is also to support brain function, maybe during periods of high cognitive demand, or potentially as a neuroprotective strategy, Given the links between brain energy metabolism and conditions like Alzheimer's, she suggests a higher dose might be needed,
How much higher?
perhaps closer to 10 grams per day. The idea is that this provides enough creatine to saturate the muscles and have sufficient amounts cross the blood-brain barrier to augment ATP production within brain cells.
Interesting. Are there any pitfalls with creatine supplements, forms to avoid?
Yes, she offers a couple of cautions. She advises skepticism towards novelty forms, particularly creatine gummies. Third-party testing has sometimes shown these can contain less active ingredient than claimed, possibly due to degradation from heat during manufacturing.
So stick to the basics.
Pretty much. She generally recommends sticking with creatine monohydrate powder, ideally one with third-party certification like NSF Certified for Sport, to ensure purity and potency. She also notes that capsules can be impractical because you need to swallow quite a large number to reach those therapeutic doses, especially at the 10-gram level. Powder is just easier. And alongside supplements and exercise, we need to talk about hormesis beneficial stress. Rhonda Patrick often discusses sauna use.
Right, the heat stress benefits.
Yes, there's significant data linking regular traditional sauna use, defined typically as sessions around 175 to 192 degrees Fahrenheit for 20 minutes or more, ideally 4 to 7 times per week, with reduced risk of cardiovascular events and even dementia.
But the stress needs to be hormetically correct. What does that imply?
It means finding the sweet spot. The heat needs to be challenging enough to trigger adaptive responses in the body, improve blood flow, heat shock protein production, etc., but not so extreme that it causes excessive stress, raises cortisol too much, or becomes damaging.
So maybe 192 degrees, Sarah, is too much for some people to tolerate consistently?
Exactly. And consistency is key. Some evidence suggests you might achieve similar physiological benefits by dialing the temperature down slightly, maybe to the 185 degree February range. This can make it much more tolerable and improve adherence for people, perhaps like your wife you mentioned, who find the higher temperatures really difficult. The best sauna protocol is the one you can actually stick to regularly.
That makes sense. Find the dose that works for you. And speaking of foundational elements, perhaps the most critical one, which Dr. Florence Comate absolutely emphasizes, is sleep.
Oh, unequivocally. She considers it the most important variable, full stop. She famously tells her high-achieving, sleep-deprived patients who boast about getting up at 4 a.m. to exercise after only a couple of hours sleep.
What does she tell them?
She tells them, "I'm sorry, but please don't get up. You need the sleep far more than you need that workout right now." Sleep, she insists, trumps exercise.
That's a powerful statement, especially in our productivity-obsessed culture.
It is. Because sleep is when the vast majority of repair, recovery, and consolidation happens physically and mentally. Her advice is practical. Maintain a strict sleep schedule, even on weekends if possible. Get off screens an hour or two before bed. Keep the bedroom dark, quiet, and cool, ideally around 65 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit.
And the timing of food and drink matters hugely too, especially alcohol.
Massively. Avoid eating large meals or drinking significant amounts of fluid, especially alcohol, within about 2 to 3 hours of bedtime. Alcohol in particular might make you feel drowsy initially, but it severely disrupts sleep architecture later in the night, especially REM and deep sleep, which are crucial for recovery. Many people see this clearly on sleep trackers or even continuous glucose monitors.
Right. I've definitely seen the impact of even one drink on my own CGM data overnight. It really tanks sleep quality.
It does. Prioritizing sleep isn't lazy, it's fundamental for performance and health.
All these elements, mindset, bone health, inflammation, movement, sleep, they all point towards a more personalized approach. And that's really the core of Dr. Florence Comet's work, isn't it? The N of one approach.
Absolutely. Her entire philosophy revolves around using an individual's unique data, their genomics, their blood biomarkers, their lifestyle factors from wearables, body composition, to create interventions tailored precisely for them.
Because what works for one person, even a high-profile biohacker like a Brian Johnson or an Andrew Huberman, might be ineffective or even harmful for someone else.
Precisely. She gives examples like intermittent fasting. It can be brilliant for some people's metabolic health, but for others, perhaps someone prone to low blood sugar or under high chronic stress, it could actually be detrimental, causing hypoglycemic episodes or stressing their system further.
So no one-size-fits-all protocols. It's about understanding your specific biology.
That's the essence of precision health. You have to measure to manage effectively.
What are the key data points Dr. Comite insists on collecting right at the start?
She has a core set of diagnostics. Every new patient gets fitted with a continuous glucose monitor, a CGM, even before their first consultation. That provides invaluable real-time insight into their metabolic response to food and stress.
So they see immediately how certain foods affect their blood sugar.
Yes. And that's combined with really comprehensive blood testing, looking beyond standard panels, and detailed body composition analysis, like an in-body scan, which measures muscle mass, visceral fat, and more. This combination creates a detailed metabolic and physical fingerprint for that individual.
And from that data, she focuses on specific biomarkers.
Yes, she often mentions there are about 5 key biomarkers she tracks closely related to longevity and optimal health, which she finds are rarely in the truly optimal range, even in people who think they're quite healthy. Optimizing those becomes a primary goal.
That level of physiological personalization is clearly the future. But there's another layer of programming we often don't consider, which is psychological and even generational. The story Nick Thompson shared with Rich Roll about his father was incredibly powerful in illustrating this.
It really was. It's quite a harrowing account, actually. Nick Thompson describes his father's long, slow descent into alcoholism, financial ruin, and significant emotional distress over many years.
And Nick tried to help him.
He did, desperately. But at one point, his father resorted to threatening suicide as a way to manipulate Nick into giving him money. A profound betrayal.
That's incredibly traumatic.
It is. But the really chilling part of the story comes later. Nick discovered, through finding old family letters and diaries, that his own father had pulled the exact same manipulative tactic threatening suicide to get money on his father, Nick's grandfather.
Wow, so it wasn't just a desperate act, it was a learned, repeated pattern of behavior passed down through the generation.
Exactly. A conscious, destructive pattern cycling down the family line. It's a stark illustration of how these deep, often unconscious, generational scripts and traumas can influence our behaviors, our choices, our coping mechanisms, sometimes decades later, often in ways we don't even recognize.
It highlights how difficult it can be to break free from those inherited patterns, even when we're aware of them. We're often acting out invisible family legacies.
You really have to actively fight against those ingrained scripts sometimes. But what was also moving about Nick Thompson's story was his reflection, despite all the chaos and pain his father caused, on the unwavering baseline of love and commitment his father did always show him.
So even amidst the dysfunction, that core connection was there.
Yes. And Nick concluded that ultimately, passing on that fundamental sense of love and security to his own children was perhaps the most important legacy he could provide, even while grappling with his own inherited struggles. It's a complex picture of damage and redemption existing side by side. #outro.
So after weaving through all this information, mindset, bones, inflammation, movement, sleep, personalization, even these deep generational patterns, what's the main message for you, the listener, trying to make sense of it all?
I think the core takeaway, synthesizing the work of experts like Dr. Vonda Wright, Rhonda Patrick, Karen Krishnan, and Dr. Florence Comedy is really quite empowering. It's that aging with vitality, with strength and clarity, isn't fundamentally a matter of luck or just good genes.
It's a choice.
It's an active, intentional, and importantly measurable choice. The insights are there, the tools are available, from embracing that mindset mobilization Dr. Wright talks about, to building bone density in that critical decade, tackling inflammaging through diet, optimizing muscle with smart training and nutrition, personalizing through data. We can influence the trajectory.
So if we bring this right back to the practical, actionable advice from Dr. Florence Comedy and Dr. Vonda Wright, that sense of urgency and personal responsibility, what's the final thought for someone listening right now?
It comes down to this, I think. If you truly accept the evidence that your future health, your future independence, is worth investing in daily, and that the alternative is likely an accelerating decline into frailty, then the crucial question is, what is the one single, measurable, non-negotiable action you will commit to taking today?
Just one thing.
Just one tangible step to start. Will be booking that DEXA scan you've been putting off? Committing to that brisk 30-minute walk Dr. Wright recommends for cellular signaling? Prioritizing getting to bed earlier tonight for proper recovery, maybe skipping that late-night drink? Or perhaps making a conscious effort to hit that higher protein target Dr. Patrick suggests?
Choosing that one concrete action is the starting point.
It's the first step in actively defying maybe your genetic predispositions or those old habits, and intentionally starting to build a stronger, more capable future self starting right now.
A powerful call to action indeed. Something concrete to consider until the next time we dive deep into the data.